Concussions have become one of the most discussed medical issues in recent years. You may be wondering why that is and what a concussion is exactly. Well, by definition, a concussion is a violent shock or hit to the head that causes bruising or swelling of the brain. The problem is that it is very hard to determine whether or not you have a concussion at times. This is why I believe there should be new laws regarding concussions and the way they are handled, especially in high school sports. Now, it's a strong belief of mine that the nation as a whole should agree on having a specially trained trainer at each high school game in order to make sure each athlete is safe. Concussions affect almost everyone at one point or another, whether it's a family member, a friend, or yourself who experiences them. I have personally received 5 concussions, but luckily there were doctors on our team that had been trained to assess concussions and other injuries. I was prevented from playing for weeks, sometimes even months, until eventually I had too many concussions and had to stop playing any sort of contact sport. Now, lately, the NFL and the NHL have gone big on rule changes and concussion prevention, but the problem is that high school athletes do not receive the same type of treatments. In high school football alone, the chances of receiving a concussion are twice as high as they are in college. Now, this is a huge number, and despite rule changes and equipment modifications aimed at reducing concussions in sport, these injuries still occur frequently. The incidence of recurrent injury, which is 15 to 20%, is higher than that of the initial injury, 5 to 10% in most sports, thereby suggesting the need to validate objective assessment techniques that enable the clinician to grade the initial injury and minimize the risk of a second or third such injury. Now, this leads to my next point. While most football games do have a medic on the side waiting for any sort of incidents to occur, most other sports do not have any trained staff at the games waiting for injuries. This is a major issue in regards to teenager lives because they are incapable of evaluating themselves in order to determine whether or not they have a concussion. The other problem is the equipment athletes are using. According to the article Concussions and Young Athletes, written by Corson Dana and Jennifer Walsh, there is little evidence that current sports helmet designs reduce concussion risk, and no evidence that other devices such as mouthguards and headbands for soccer do so. Nevertheless, properly fitted helmets, face masks, and mouthguards should still be worn because they reduce the risk of other injuries, such as skull fractures and facial and dental injuries. Fortunately, there are some new ways of preventing concussions, and research is done every day in order to solve the issue. Dr. Julian Bales helped come up with a potential solution. It's a collar that is wrapped around the neck in order to prevent rotation and tearing of brain fibers. Now, this is a huge deal in regards to concussion prevention because it's capable of working much better than a typical helmet. Much research has been done and can be seen in the article Potential Solutions to Concussions by Colsey, which states, helmets have a natural limitation, said study contributor Dr. Julian Bales, former NFL and NCAA team physician and new chair of the Department of Neurosurgery at North Shore University. With some major changes or collisions, the helmet and the head, they just simply stop moving. The brain, which is floating inside, can continue the momentum, hitting against the inside of the cranium, possibly rotating and tearing fibers. Helmets work well for preventing scalp lacerations, skull fractures, and bleeding in the brain, but they don't always prevent rotation and tearing of brain fibers. Many problems exist, but as research continues, there are many different options we can go by. I believe there should be the same laws in each state for concussion prevention because currently 49 states have concussion laws on the books, but laws alone aren't enough to deal with the concussion issue. The state laws are all over the board. They have different stipulations, different reporting requirements, and the law may be on the book, but what about enforcement? These laws aren't being enforced, and I believe that the main law should be to have a trained professional at each game regardless of the sport. Some of you may be thinking that having a trained professional at each game would be too expensive for each team and wouldn't help much. But this isn't necessarily true though, because each school has a trained professional. The problem is that they don't attend all the games. They're only required to attend all the football games. And for other sports, many students studying in the health department attend the games for them. Now these are just high school students that have never been trained to truly assess injuries. Some of you may be thinking, if concussions are so hard to prevent, and we already do research on them as well, how's there any other way of preventing them? Well, this is why a trained professional at each game should be a requirement. They may be hard to assess, but it is always better to be safe than sorry. Trainers would pull on pull out any athlete with any doubt of a concussion and have them go to a doctor where they would have their final diagnosis. Concussions are serious and have fatal consequences, so it's time that we start acting that way.